It's December 28th, 8:49. Good evening. Let's start with a little British humor from K.D. Hopkins.
Ladies and gentlemen of Congress, Americans, in 2 days, my people, the people of Ukraine, will celebrate Christmas by candlelight. Not because candlelight is more romantic, no, but because millions of people are without electricity or running water this Christmas because of the Russians. The Russians took out our infrastructure, but we do not complain. No, Ukrainians do not complain. Will send me to every single award ceremony, every single parliament, and every single congress, and every single thing I can get my face on, wearing the same green t-shirt, so that I look like I just came from the front line, when in fact, I just came from the last award ceremony or the last parliament building I was at. But Ukrainians, we do not complain. We do not complain. We come here simply to tell you about faith, to give you red meat that will make you stand up and applaud, and to tell you that I need $45 billion. And even though your own people are hungry and homeless and are royally screwed, you will give me $45 billion, and I will help launder that money back to Hunter Biden and the regime. Thank you very much.
That's how it is. All right, onwards and upwards in the arts. This is what's going on today. Death of the American Dream. The following is a speech given by Gabor Mate, who is a leftist Canadian psychotherapist. I've made a few alterations, none of which change or alter the meaning of his address. I'm not sure whether or when it was given, but it's standard fare in terms of the conventional thinking of today's psychiatric community. So I'm simply using it as representative of the state of that particular profession in general. 50% of adults in this society, which considers itself the most successful society in the history of the world, actually suffer from chronic illness, heart disease, high blood pressure, cancer, autoimmune disease, and all manner of mental illnesses. In the US, the antipsychotics Risperdal and Seroquel are in the top 4 to 6 prescriptions given out in this country, not to mention antidepressants. So when I talk about the toxic culture that a materialistic society offers its members, what am I referring to? Well, materialism is a system of beliefs or behavior which considers material things, and particularly the control and possession of material things, to be more important than human values, such as connection, love, or spirituality, such as recognizing the unity of everything. And that is the kind of culture we live in. Interestingly enough, the religious right, in their opposition to the very idea of climate change or to the idea that the environment is important to look at, will quote the Old Testament, where a man is given stewardship over the earth and its creatures. When they talk about stewardship, they mean control and dominance. There is another way to look at stewardship, which is caring, nurturing, and looking after. Unfortunately, in this materialistic society, it's control and ownership we look at, and that means that the culture itself, quite apart from the physical toxins that we spew into the environment, thus altering the very air we breathe, and the chemistry of our own brains is itself toxic. We're actually also affected by the toxicity of human relationships, or the lack of human relationships. that this kind of society, emphasizing material values alone, teaches us to pursue. Thus spake Zarathustra. That's the left for you. The posturing, pontificating left. Okay, the speech is much longer than this, and it's filled with a lot of nonsense about Karl Marx and so on. What I'm pointing out is that academic leftist pseudo-intellectuals always pose as benevolent, self-sacrificing agents of love, spirituality, and unity. Meanwhile, they make a point of demonizing the Christian right as the source of all the evil in the world. It's always done indirectly by labeling all conservative Christians fascists, as in the book by the left-wing Christian nut Chris Hedges titled Christian Fascism. So in the eyes of the left, anyone who isn't a progressive Christian is a fascist Trump supporter. This is simply untrue and typical left-wing propaganda going back to Marx, Lenin, who were responsible for genocide against the Russian Christian community, sending them off to die in death camps like the ones the Christian Alexander Solzhenitsyn described in his autobiographical books like the Gulag Archipelago. Right-wing Christians are, in the minds of these extremist ideologues, a uniform, monolithic body of identically greedy, materialistic imbeciles. In other words, Mete is identifying the religious right alone as Neanderthals opposed to progress, leaving out the religious left Neanderthals like Biden, Pelosi, and himself, busy backing every single war since Vietnam, which is the sole war they oppose given the fact that they were being called to fight in it themselves. Notably, the New York Times and the rest of the liberal press supported the Vietnam War, just as they've supported every other war since and every other war before, including the genocide against the Native Americans. Liberal media are exactly what Orwell was describing in his 1949 book, 1984. The left are always calling for a return to spiritual values, back to nature. That was Hitler's slogan, back to nature. And the goddess and source and Hindu Buddhism were a myriad of theosophical beliefs and fantasies, including these days Aleister Crowley's. While pointing to Jesus Christ as the leader of the forces of intolerance and fascism, the haters, who need to be defeated by Chairman Mao, Fidel Castro, Daniel Ortega, with the assistance of their soulmates Bernie Sanders and Kamala Harris. As far as Christian fascists go, I have to concede immediately that this is a fair point. I'm only suggesting these do-gooders spreading their love and joy to all mankind might look at exactly who has been sitting atop Central Command ordering drone strikes on Afghan civilian vehicles and the like, with never an apology, like we saw in the aftermath of the humiliating and craven withdrawal from Kabul, turning over high-tech military weapons to our newfound allies, the Taliban. In other words, there is more than enough fascist imperialism to be passed back and forth from left to right as they play musical chairs in the White House while the world burns. My point is not political. Whatever people's politics are is up to them as far as I'm concerned. I'm just nauseous at continually hearing and seeing so many warmongering maniacs bombing civilians at every war zone on the globe in the name of their supposed spirituality and deep love of other human beings who just happen to have the wrong religion or political beliefs, to the extent any of them are actually consistently obeying the moral laws of their own respective religions. If countries are going to go after each other for dominance of the remaining resources left on planet Earth, at least we might be spared the moral posturing about their limitless love for the poor and oppressed people they pretend to be rescuing from their bomber jets. What really needs to be done is to look accurately at just how closely the soaring moral rhetoric of these posturing psychotherapists, religious leaders, and political leaders match their behavior and actions, follow the money, as it were. Perhaps notice that the epic mental illness of Generation Z, sex, drugs, and rock and roll culture originates primarily from the liberal urban cities running the length of the east and west coast, as the Viennese contemporary of the father of psychoanalysis, Sigmund Freud, wrote. It's a thinker named Karl Kraus. Psychoanalysis is the disease for which it offers itself as the cure. As far as my experience goes, I've never seen anyone cured of mental illness through psychotherapy, which does nothing but feed parasitically off the mentally ill for profit. In my experience, the so-called therapists themselves are just as mentally ill as their own so-called patients, along with the rest of the mentally ill society addicted to the material possessions that define these psychoanalysts. The psychoanalysts just happen to be immensely rich in comparison to the people they treat. Even worse, we have the delusional Timothy Leary, Baba Ram Das School of Harvard Psychotherapy, where the ultra-rich drop LSD together and revisit their past lives as pharaonic deities or Mayan Aztec priests presiding over utopian civilizations filled with peace and love, flower children, and beauty. Beautiful, loving beings like the Aztecs, according to Neil Young and company. In the real world, these Neil Young, Bob Dylan revolutionaries were bombing science research centers in college campuses, robbing banks, shootouts with the police. In the building on the campus of the University of Madison, Wisconsin, where I worked as a janitor, they killed a student working in the building who hadn't gotten news of the bomb threat. So this constant propaganda from the left calling Christian right dangerous domestic terrorists both flies in the face of American history, just as it flies in the face of current history. The same applies to European history, South American history, Canadian history, and so on. The 68 revolution was a violent left-wing armed revolution. Anyone who doesn't know that is detached from the historical truth, much like the liberal psychotherapy-minded controlled fraternity, which is itself an outgrowth of the CIA Gestapo joint mind control program called MK Ultra. Where exactly did the mind-blown Leary and Alpert get their LSD from in the first place? As Harvard psychology professors passing it around to their underage students so all of them might indulge in the 60s sex carnival that we recently see manifested in the leftist enlightened ones of the Sam Bankman fraud sex drug cult partying in the Bahamas. Well, that would be the CIA. Sure, once entrepreneurial chemists like Owsley Stanley and his fellow third eye opened academics became multimillionaires, the operation of the CIA passed from their hands, these smooth operators in Langley, into the similarly capable hands of the counterculture left. This is to say that Gabor, Zsa Zsa Gabor, and his do-gooder brethren lamenting the toxic materialism of the lesser beings lacking their deep spiritual enlightenment as they leave the convention site in their Porsches and BMWs to drive back to luxury suites. These are the ones primarily responsible for the decadent culture they pretend to have risen above. This goes just as much for the right-wing Christian hypocrites who practice exactly the same parasitical mind control over the masses, all on their journeys to the throne room of the Lord. Hallelujah! I define people as mentally ill according to how deeply they've descended into personal fantasy worlds, naturally joined by others living in similar prosperity and success, along with how deeply dependent they are in these fantasy worlds to go on existing into the future, while steadfastly ignoring the activities of the governments who subsidize their wasteful lifestyles, mainly by printing money that nobody has and nobody will ever pay back. The consumers of what the leftist moralists term toxic materialism are the same right-wing moralists living next door to them in upscale, secure compounds. The feudal peasant class they apparently believe themselves superior to are the drugged out masses providing them this toxic materialism. So why are they lamenting the excessive carnality they luxuriate in at the house that Epstein built with the help of his elite friends? Who are his friends? Donald Trump? How about that? Bill Clinton? Bill Richardson? Alan Dershowitz? Lawrence Krauss, the physicist? Stephen Hawking, the physicist? You know, all the Gawker has printed the Black Book of all the names, the Woody Allens, you know, the Roman Polanski's. Well, people watch this swill day in and day out, and then they act like moralists. Go ahead and watch it, you know, but don't come off like you're spiritually enlightened. Give us all a break, really. I think all the churches should be shut down. I really do. I think the churches, I'm talking about the ashrams, the yoga, the Buddhist centers, tear down the Buddhist statues. You're going to tear down the saints of the church, knock the heads off the bloody Buddhists and all this other bullshit. Who are you kidding? Who are you kidding? The sexy sex cult of Trungpa Rinpoche or Osho with his sex slave. He's wearing his Rolexes and driving his Rolls Royces, and they're, having sex in the public park and trying to take over the local government of the conservative Christians. We're just a bunch of, rural people with rural educations farming out in trying to eke out a living in rural Oregon before these asshole, academics with their college degrees come out and are going to create, lawyers, multi-million-dollar lawyers protecting, trying to poison the people with their bio lab, creating botulism and putting it in the food of the Antelope, Oregon residents, so they'll be too sick to come out and vote in the local elections, where they're going to elect Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh as the leader of this giant commune, like Jim Jones's People's Temple or all of it. This is not spirituality. It's fascism. It's fascism, right or left. It's totalitarianism. Where's the freedom in all this? Where's the freedom in a sex slave colony? Unification Church was the same thing. They had their own newspaper. They still do, as far as I know. I'm one of these people that refuse to read the mainstream, the swill that comes out of the mainstream media. It's too sickening to even, I stopped watching it years and years ago. I have better things to do, like a life to live and explore and think. And I don't care. Go ahead. Tear down all the churches. Burn the country to the ground. That's a good idea. That makes a lot of sense. Anyway, let's move on to other subjects. Los Angeles. So we can see exactly how this benevolent psychoanalytic socialist utopia is being implemented on the ground. As of today, it's being announced by city officials that the endless rent moratorium is set to be extended into the future as far away as next June. The numbers of people no longer paying rent to their landlords, these are small landlords, has continued to mushroom to the point it's now upwards of 800,000 people in arrears. These small landlords are being driven out of business. They aren't going to be able to get their money back. They can't afford lawyers to sue. The law is designed to benefit the major corporate holders of investment real estate like Vanguard and BlackRock. Who runs BlackRock? That would be Larry Fink. That's Bill Clinton's best pal, and they sit up on top of the Clinton Global Initiative on stage talking about, just like Klaus Schwab, how happy everyone is going to be not owning anything like these small landlords and eating bug food and living packed into apartments as they take over people's property. You know, the people who think they're in the upper middle class, forget about it. You're not in the upper middle class. Just like nobody listened to or they think that George Carlin is talking about somebody else, and he says, it's you're not in it. It's a private club, and you're not in it. You vote for it year in and year out because you think you're in it, but you're not in it, and they ain't sharing their wealth. You know, Kim Kardashian or Kanye or Beyonce and the Black Revolution, you know, and Jay-Z. You think you're going to get anywhere near the security perimeter of these people? They're hiring. Sam Bankman-Fried has got like $10,000 a week security guards around him now, from what I just heard. You know, this is feudalism. This is called neo-feudalism. And fighting against this is futile. I'll tell you that much. Large landlords have deluxe rental properties in the capital to keep them maintained as they charge premium rents, $3,000 a month and more, to wealthier individuals who can afford these rents. Used to be in Silicon Valley, see, but that's crashing now because that's who's getting laid off. Not to mention the Washington Post is, you know, not to mention Twitter, like all this people who write this woke garbage are bye-bye. But I'm not laughing about it because they've done their job, okay? I don't want to see people hurt. I don't get any schadenfreude or thrills seeing anybody lose their job. They certainly deserve it. I mean, they certainly deserve for this phony socialist revolution that has done nothing but destroy the middle class, including themselves. By and large, these are people coming from prosperous homes that are renting these 2 and 3 bedroom apartments that like collect with 5 or 6 people to an apartment and sharing 2 bathrooms or at most, and food and everything else permanently. Nobody's going to be buying any houses anymore. They're just whatever equity and wealth that their parents have stored up is just going to be vaporized. I hate to break it to people. I mean, you know, somebody has to, because the newspapers aren't going to do it. The media isn't going to do it. Your Bugs Bunny people, you know, your Walt Disney people arguing about the latest, how much money is Avatar 2 making, aren't going to tell you. Due to the inability of small landlords to collect rent to pay for their own mortgages and repairs, the real estate corporations can continue collecting their inflated rents, which would otherwise come down, or the central planners of California not siding with the interests of their corporate donors. It's also keeping rental units from coming onto the market because the renters getting free apartments courtesy of the small landlords prevent this from happening. It's all designed to ensure that the standards of middle-class Americans will continue to decline. This is certain because the U.S. is now entering the 3rd consecutive month of declining GDP. No doubt this next quarter GDP number will be lower than the last, too, because the big corporate behemoths from Amazon and Meta to the big box stores, these are what anchor shopping malls, and all the satellite small businesses around them collapse as well when they collapse. They're all dramatically cutting their workforces, which are no longer needed. The laid off workers, many of them high salaried, as I said before, will no longer be able to make rent or mortgage payments as they go on unemployment, which is inadequate to cope with the surging inflation caused by the Fed magically printing non-existent money. Yes, that's where you get inflation, when you just print, you know, $1.7 trillion that passed in the last 4,000 pages. It's all designed for, you know, weapons, pharma, agribiz, the real estate investment funds. It's all designed for anybody except the working people who are going under. Next year, it's all collapsing. This is, it's baked into the cake. Oh boy. it's what's called a downward spiral that picks up speed as all these different bubbles collapse in on each other. It's called imploding. Rather than exploding, it implodes inwards. This comes on top of the 40 or more year, and this is who designed it. This is 40 or more year urging of these liberal publications like the New York Times, where economists like the odious Thomas Friedman sold this, sending all American manufacturing and all our technological innovations to China or Mexico or other third world countries, where the benefit of all the tax money and the innovation and the hard work of Americans creating this technology were just given away to who? Corporate donors. Payoffs like Katie Hopkins is saying. Burisma Oil, payoffs to the Biden kids. How is this Clinton, one of the richest men in the world? He's a governor from Arkansas when he shows up and watches. How about Barack Obama? How about Joe Biden? What's their net worth now? How about Antonia Ocasio-Cortez? I've heard she is worth like $19 million. That's pretty good for 2 years in Congress, dismantling the working class. Anyway, that's what's happening. I wouldn't lie to you. I'm not a politician. This has now not only predictably bankrupted America, leaving it with a trade deficit that continues to widen, while the national debt keeps ascending into the stratosphere. The hollowed out economy is continually disguised by passing out government checks, which are then spent to give the illusion that there is still a prosperity that voters themselves have canceled. But as we look around at this year's earnings reports, we see Gates Foundation, Tesla, Google, Meta, and others falling, while those like FTX are vaporized. The major banks themselves are only propped up by the U.S. Treasury and Fed injecting liquidity that only serves to expand increasingly unstable debt bubble. And the Fed, that's who's quantitative easing, they're buying it all under the table because nobody else is buying this bad debt, just like junk bonds and all the rest of it, this collateralized debt obligations, all these fancy, con artists with their financial con jobs of the 80s. It's all on, it's not on steroids, it's on cocaine and amphetamine, just like Caroline Ellison and Bankman Fried and their parents. In Europe, the U.S. war against Russia, through its proxy Ukraine, proceeds towards its inevitable conclusion. The media propaganda hoax is most effective there, since Americans are even more inclined to ignore bad news overseas than they are domestically. In the European conflict, the Russians have decimated both their Ukrainian military, and the military weaponry and ammunition are depleted and degraded. This is neither seen nor understood by the media-addicted U.S. public, who have resolutely refused to look at the reality of the changes that have gone on in Europe over the last 10 months alone. They mistakenly believe that whatever goes on in Europe has nothing at all to do with them or their future prospects. In fact, it will be completely determinative of their own futures. This is where Gabor Mate is correct in his estimation of the kind of delusional state people arrive at who view reality solely from the point of view of material possessions, and that have an imaginary belief that they have control over that through magical thinking. As long as they stay positive, everything's going to be all right. As long as they close themselves into a bubble with their other, social network people who don't look outside it, everything is not going to be all right. It's not going to be all right. It's like putting on blinders and walking into a hurricane blizzard like those people did up in Buffalo, saying, "Oh, we didn't know it was coming." I'm looking at people in Rockaway Beach. Their houses they're all underwater. They say, "We didn't know it was coming." What, you don't look at a weather report? We didn't know. Who knew any of this was coming? This is crazy. I mean, I don't know. Is anybody? I'm watching it. I've been watching the all these disasters building, and you can see weather maps. Of course, not if you're on just on your local news. I guess they don't really tell you the worst, most disastrous winter storm is coming on Christmas, courtesy of, if you believe in God anyway, courtesy of God. Of course, that's why he's so hated, I guess, because he does these terrible things to people. And at the same time, he doesn't exist. Hollywood movies for decades have provided power fantasies that Americans have come to believe in without question. From one Clint Eastwood movie to Tom Cruise spectacular after the next, where might makes right, and the best way to deal with media-designated villains is the application of maximum force through superior technology. These fantasies bear no relationship at all to reality. In Europe today, that fantasy is threadbare in contrast to the reality of the Russian army preparing a massive invasion of the Ukraine against an all but non-existent resistance. Yes, American forces are on the ground in Poland alongside Polish troops, but there is no sign whatsoever that Biden is going to send them into action against a vastly superior military. The rest of Europe long ago made clear that they aren't going to send their soldiers on the same kind of suicide mission Zelensky has happily sent his army on. And last week, that army's been supplemented by the Volodymyr and Madame Zelensky sending off teenage boys to their deaths at the front, just so. This is just barbarism, like you saw in Hitler's day with the Hitler Youth, or you go back to the First World War. Generals just. Kubrick made a movie about it, Paths of Glory. The carnage for no reason, where the people just mow each other down with the advanced weapons. It was the same thing in the Civil War. So nobody reads it. Well, I mean, it's not a movie. It's certainly not a movie. It's coming to a theater near you. I believe that what goes around comes around. I mean, the Hindus believe this. The Buddhists believe this in karma. It's simply karma. You can't just turn it on and off like it's a TV show. Change the channel. They just repossess the TV. They've just repossessed the house. Honey, they repossess the kids. No, they own the kids. The state owns the kids. All the kids have to do is say, I will tell their fourth grade teacher they want a sex change operation, and their parents. This is in Northern Europe, and their parents are fascists. If I don't know. I guess the Europeans pay for sex change operations for children. Who knows? It's a descent into complete. The left are completely mad. I mean, the right wing are bad enough. The whole world is descending into terminal madness. It's become perfectly clear to Putin. He's not mad. I mean, that's the wonderful thing about the West. They keep defining somebody else as insane and crazy and doing. Putin is perfectly rational. He's winning the war with his generals, and they're just taking their methodical time, letting the West, expend all of our weaponry. What are we going to have to defend ourselves? The Chinese are sending warplanes and naval vessels due to our provocation towards Taiwan right now. I just saw in another report. Meanwhile, all Americans. I mean, I'm going from coffee shop to down the park. Not a single one even knows we're in the Ukraine war. They don't even know what's happening. They don't even know we're in World War III. I mean, I'm sure they're out there somewhere. I mean, I see the preppers with their goggles on and their flak jackets and their, weapons loaded. I'm listening to one guy talk about it. There's a car is driving behind him, drives up, and he says he pulls his, his tool of defense or whatever, language, the code language using, and the other guy says, I've got a clip of 50 rounds. And it's just, when this blows, I mean, I see so many people out there who are just waiting, for the green light to go off. So they're all prepared. They've all got their security defense system and perimeter and everything else. But it's all coming from the media and from the White House and from the absolute disinterest our government has in the health and the security and the welfare of the people who elected them. But the people are electing according to their anger and rage at some imagined enemy that the media. Oh, you've got the fascists, the white fascist supremacists of the Republicans, and the radical Marxist Leninists are in the White House, and that's pretty close to the truth. I mean, the historian Victor Davis Hanson has said rightly, he's a California historian, that this is the most radical American administration in history, and that surpasses FDR, and FDR was a socialist president enacting, and so was LBJ, but there's nothing like this. Nothing like this administration. Not only that, but the other two presidents, FDR and LBJ, cared about the country, so they wouldn't never have let immigrants pour in. 5-6 million immigrants. Who's going to feed? Who's going to house? Who's going to clothe? They certainly, if they go up to the Cape, or if they go up to Kamala Harris's residence, if they go up to any liberal governor's office, they'll be sent packing. Oh no, we're socialists. What are you doing here, expecting a job? Man, oh man! I mean, this is just total insanity. Anyway, it's become perfectly clear to Putin and his military commanders that the bellicose bloviating of the likes of Boris Johnson and Emmanuel Macron at the outset of the war were no more than those of Volodymyr Zelensky and his admirers in the West. Just bloviating, just hot air, just theater. It's solely intended to entertain the stupefied movie watchers who take the clownish antics of Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi presiding over RuPaul drag races contests and Senate Leader Chuck Schumer dancing to Hava Nagila at the disco as signs of a great moral victory over American fascism, like they've defeated the evil Donald Trump. And that's still my Apple News stories. It's all, if there isn't a Trump story about the perfidies, or we're arresting. If they can't, what is this? 2 years later, because they don't want to govern. They don't want to take any responsibility for this debacle. So they've got to keep throwing the orange man up there as red meat, as if, who cares? I never cared about Donald Trump in the first place, not being a Republican myself. It's possible to be a conservative Christian without being a Republican, believe it or not. There is no such thing as a conservative. These are conservative Christians that voted a $1.37 trillion budget that Ronald Reagan and his, just spending to the sky. He comes in, the tax and spend Democrats. Boy, they didn't see nothing until Ronald Reagan arrived. And then Clinton outdoes them, and then Obama, and then it's right on down the line. Words have no meaning, I'm trying to get some rational definition by looking at the actions of people, to at least see that these words have no meaning anymore. There's Rand Paul as a conservative, or Thomas Massey, the two people who wanted some kind of basic accounting for where all the tax money in this military spending boondoggle of $44 billion, where is that going? What is it? Where is it going? Oh, we're not telling you. This is a secret government now. The taxpayers don't know where the weaponry we're sending goes, or into whose hand it goes. It's probably, call me conspiracy minded, but 10 to 1 it's into, whatever kind of black market exists that the CIA has long had connections to, like the Iran Contra affair, where they're running a arms dealership with Adnan Khashoggi and the BCCI, the Bank of Credit and Commerce, or the Bank of Crooks and Criminals. It was called. Does that? Nobody knows what I'm talking about, I'm sure. It's called the Iran-Contra War. There's a whole big, thick book by Theodore Draper you can read to familiarize yourself with just what went on back then, and just when that secret government was shown to be in control of the U.S. It's that's as long ago as that we weren't living in any kind of anything but a fictitious democracy. There goes, there I go again. It's like Andy Rooney. Remember what I should put on an Andy Rooney mask? Does anybody know? Not Mickey Rooney, Andy, his dad. In the real world, the Russian youth have been lining up at military recruitment centers since Putin called for 300,000 new troops to join in the defense of their homeland from the Western invaders who have attacked them for centuries, trying to destroy them utterly. And they were invaded by Bonaparte, and they all froze to death, and they also died of, it was cholera, some kind of virus that killed most of, it was the winter, the Russian winter, and the cholera, let's call it that. And then, our friend Adolf got the brilliant idea into his head that he could fight a war on two fronts. Hitler would have won the war if he had simply not attacked Russia, who was his ally. Anyway, that's just the history of it. And the latest news today, I'll finish with this, is that pending sales of houses have collapsed 38.6% over the last year. This is the worst collapse ever. It's also reported that 2 more gas pipeline leaks are shutting down fuel to San Diego and Corpus Christi, Texas. One of them is refined oil and the other is crude oil. All right, God bless everyone out there. I hope that you all stay safe, and my prayers go out to both right and left, far right, and everyone in between.